Greetings, Audio Avengers. Welcome to the Marvelous TV Club, your headquarters for insightful and entertaining discussions of the latest episode of Marvel television. Moon Knight is in the books, and it's time to take stock of the series. Last week on Storycast, we discussed a powerful episode that dealt with trauma and mental health in complex ways we've never seen in the MCU, aside from maybe the very best moments of Jessica Jones. Maeve and Amanda really turned me around on that episode and unearthed a lot of meaning that I missed, and that really meant a lot to me as a fan of the MCU. Now we have this finale. Mark and Steven fought their way to a stable relationship, Layla and Tawaret teamed up, Arthur fed Amit a lot of souls before Jake Lockley fed him a couple bullets, and Khonshu still misses Mark Spector so bad that he name-checked him on the license plate of his new limo. So, how do we feel about all of these resolutions? Well, that's what our Charactercast crew is here to discuss. I'm your multi-hyphenate host, producer, editor, social media maven, and more, Marc Faletti. And as always on Charactercast, I'm joined by the MCU's finest judges of character. First, Kristine Kippins. Hi, Kristine.
Hi, Mark.
And second to none, Jesse Taylor. What's up, man?
How's it going? Speaking of being a judge of character, I've got a few opinions over here. If anybody wants to see them, I can leak them to you right now.
I just talk to Politico or whatever.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I've got two lawyers on this podcast, right? I have to ask about your reaction to the news that leaked that the Supreme Court is drafting an opinion that would overturn Roe v. Wade. Kristine, we worked at the Center for Reproductive Rights together. How did you feel when you heard that news?
It was quite a bit of a shock. I mean, not the end result, but seeing it in black and white, it's very different than Roe's gonna fall, we gotta be prepared. Roe's gonna fall, we gotta be prepared. And then to actually see Roe and Casey are overturned in black and white was just very startling. And I was numb for the longest time. Now I'm like enraged, ready to burn everything down. I'm like, what is our constitutional structure? It is bullshit. It is absolute bullshit right now because this nonpartisan body is acting in a full partisan way. And our constitution is meaningless now. This whole structure fails. Our democracy is no more. So that's how I'm feeling, Mark.
So my first response when I saw it was that it was a prank. I thought, okay, some right-wing organization released what they said was Alito's opinion, because if anybody's going to write something like that, it's going to be Alito. And, you look at it and like, okay, nah, this is bullshit. This is not what's happening, because you, in a lot of ways, don't want to accept it. I read it. It's bad. It's bad from a reasoning perspective. It's bad from a substantive perspective. He gets history wrong. He gets law wrong.
Yep.
He gets women wrong. He gets babies wrong. Like, just sort of on every level, it's bad.
And it's boring.
Oh,
it's a boring ass read.
It is 98 pages single spaced. Like, just make it. He's going for what he's going for. Just, you get 20 pages. It's a page limit. Like, it doesn't really matter how much you put behind, I don't like abortion. It's illegal now.
Oh, my favorite part was when he became the savior of black babies everywhere and made the most racist argument that
so bad.
It's black babies that are being aborted the most, as though black women have no agency whatsoever over choosing abortions. It was just absolutely maddening.
And as if black women are surprised by the fact that they're having black babies.
Right.
They just go to the doctor and it's like, oh shit, this baby's black?
Right. Terrible.
Yeah, it's, my favorite part was the use of the highly scientific term abortionists multiple times in the opinion. Real classy sign that you're definitely not on some bullshit. But look, Kristine, if people are concerned about this, and I know a lot of people are, what can they do about this? What should folks do?
First of all, what people need to know and be very cognizant of is that Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land right now. Okay, so if you have an appointment to get an abortion, go fucking get it. Like, do not think that all of a sudden you cannot access it. Until we have an actual opinion, Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land. So go get your abortion if you need one. The other thing I would say is give to abortion funds, give to independent providers. They desperately need your help. Now, abortion funds help provide funds.
Yeah.
Abortion funds help provide funds for people who are in desperate need of money in order to pay for their abortion. Because abortions, one, in very many states, you don't have an insurance plan that will cover abortion. The people who tend to have abortions already have children. You need to take care of childcare and pay for that. In many states, there are waiting periods, so you have to pay for travel. Sometimes you might have to pay for a hotel. There are so many additional costs to abortion, and oftentimes people who are trying to access it are economically challenged. So in order to get this healthcare that is essential and very common, unfortunately, many states have to set up abortion funds so that people can actually access and pay for the care. So abortion funds, honestly, they are what's going to save us, because they're organizing, they are getting people to clinics, and they're mostly led by people of color.
Yeah.
So I really encourage people to support their local abortion fund, support their local independent providers. Planned Parenthood is amazing. Planned Parenthood has a lot of money. Support your independent providers.
Yeah, $275 million fresh from Mackenzie Scott. So I think they're fine without us. We can donate our money elsewhere.
Yeah.
So any particular fund that you recommend?
So I am supporting all of the Texas abortion funds right now, because Texas is basically already in a state where Roe v. Wade no longer exists. The Supreme Court has allowed Senate Bill 8 to go into effect. So there's this vigilante law that's in place in Texas where if you get an abortion after 6 weeks, folks can basically drag you into court and get paid for suing you over assisting someone getting an abortion, performing the abortion. It's a money-making thing now over in Texas. So no one is providing abortions for the most part after 6 weeks. And 6 weeks, most people don't know that they're pregnant 6 weeks after their last menstrual period. So we're already seeing a world without Roe in Texas. So I'm trying to support all of the funds in Texas. And there's a link to a page that supports all of the funds. But if you pick one in Texas, that's great. I'm trying to support all of them.
Yeah, so we'll put that in the show notes. Just check there if you want to donate to that. Jesse, what about you? You got an abortion fund in mind?
I do. So I am an Ohioan, and we have one statewide abortion fund, Women Have Options. It's at womenhaveoptions.org. And Ohio is one of those states where abortion right now is more readily accessible than a state like Texas. But we have an increasingly radical Republican legislature who are ready and willing to pass laws. And I believe we also have trigger laws that are in place so that the second Roe is overturned, it's effectively the worst possible option. So whatever the most restriction they can put in place is, that will come into effect, I believe, within 1 month of Roe falling. So Women Have Options is a great organization, statewide. And again, they don't have the resources of a Planned Parenthood. So it's a great place to put money to ensure that, people have access to what is now a constitutional right and is still a right, even if the court says it's not.
Damn straight.
We'll put that link in the show notes too. And one more in the show notes. I was born in Missouri, and Missouri also has a really terrible trigger law that the governor has signaled will take effect when Roe is overturned, which will make it so restrictive that even the morning after pill could be determined very easily to be considered illegal, and people could be criminalized for that in Missouri. So that's really fun.
Except the morning after pill is contraception. It's not an abortifacient.
Except that now the definition of that is up in the air because this decision, right, Kristine, signals that science is no longer a requirement for the law. So all bets are off as to whether or not that would be upheld by this Supreme Court. If they're using terms like abortionist, I'm not confident that they will respect the science of something like the morning after pill. So and they've signaled in Missouri that they will apply that restrictive definition when it takes effect. So that's interesting. So mofunds.org is where I would donate if you're concerned about Missouri and what will go on there. So we'll put all those in the show notes. So our reality is totally madness. There is a reality that is more entertainingly madness, or several of them potentially, in a Doctor Strange movie that is coming out also for some of us within the next couple hours. So let's transition very awkwardly from the maddening reality of this right. universe to the multiverse of madness that is coming. I want to know, Jesse, what are you most looking forward to about seeing Doctor Strange?
Sam Raimi. I am just excited to see him back in the saddle. I am excited for what I've heard is a much more horror-themed movie and seems to be a lot more director-driven movie than a lot of what we get from the MCU. I'm willing to give it a chance, and I'm excited to see something, given what we've gotten over the past year from the MCU. Some good TV, some not so good TV, pretty good Spider-Man movie, Eternal, some other things. I'm excited to just see what happens here, and also to see if Sam Raimi can make me like What If.
That is a tall order, my man. What about you, Kristine? What are you looking forward to the most about seeing it?
Oh my God, so many things. You guys don't understand. Like, when I heard about the concept of this film and that it was going to be the MCU debut into horror, I was like, I have to stay alive long enough to see this film. And that's what I kept saying about Game of Thrones. I have to stay alive long enough to see the end of this film. Then it was, I have to stay alive long enough to see Endgame. And now it's this film. I'm so excited to see an MCU horror film. All of the things that Jesse said, plus the return of my girl, Wanda Maximoff. I am so obsessed with her. I rewatched WandaVision last week for the fourth time, and I could not be more excited to see her on the big screen again as a full-fledged, deep character that you're not just why is this woman who's in love with an android on my screen? I don't understand her. I don't like her. She's filler. No, she's fantastic. She's powerful. And I'm really interested to see if Doctor Strange gets jealous and somehow tries to control Wanda because, she's supposed to be more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme, who I guess is Wong, but whatever.
Yeah, for now, definitely Wong. I'm with you. Wanda is definitely the thing I'm most excited about, especially in light of all of our conversations about TV. And that conversation, Kristine, that you and I had with Maeve about WandaVision 1 year later really reminded me of how strong that show was. And I look forward to that emotional arc being carried forward because it does seem very clearly that we're going to get a lot of references to WandaVision. So give that a quick binge if you haven't seen it in a while, or at least hit those last couple episodes to, refresh yourself, I think, before you go into Doctor Strange. And that show, the finale wasn't perfect, but it had some really interesting and creative moments. I'm calling this podcast episode the messy finale because it's a reference to the first episode we had on Moon Knight where I called it the messy self, which talked a lot about Mark Spector. But this finale, I was a little less enthusiastic about than I was the WandaVision finale. Now, the internet, y'all, seems to disagree a little bit. 8.4 rating on IMDb at time of recording. Lots of positive reviews in places like The Guardian. But for me, I've got some questions. And look, Maeve and Amanda turned me around last week on an episode that was really complicated and had a lot more meaning than I initially saw. So let's see what happens now, because just as I did at the end of Hawkeye, I'd like to return to the idea of asking y'all some true or false questions as we wrap up the series. Then I want to turn it over to you to talk about anything you want to discuss. I just have 4 of these to start, and then we'll flip over to what y'all want to talk about. Jesse, I'd like to start with you with a very straightforward true or false question. True or false, Amit was just a knockoff Thanos?
False. Amit was a knockoff Ultron.
Oh, okay. Hot take. Talk to me.
Yeah. So Thanos, the thing that made Thanos compelling was that he was acting in service of a vision and didn't care who it hurt or helped. And so it was, in a sense, amoral. Just, it didn't matter. Half of all life was going to disappear. Could have been his family, could have been complete strangers, didn't matter. Whereas Ultron truly cared about who he was killing because it was to send a message. And Amit felt much more like an Ultron in the sense that Amit cared who died. There was judgment going on, and only certain people would survive so that she could rule. So I give her more of an Ultron vibe.
I guess what struck me with the Thanos thing was, one, all the talk about balance in this episode. We kept hearing about balance, and it just took me back to, Thanos sitting there with the knife on his fingertip, talking to Gamora, and this idea that somehow there is an ability to simplify the world or make it inhabitable for whatever your disciples are or whatever. And I certainly take your point that there are some strong differences here, but the purple energy also kind of threw me for that. I don't know, Kristine, what do you think?
I mean, I'm with Jesse. I had a big faults for this one. I definitely wrote down perfectly balanced as all things should be, because I definitely got the reference too, but their calculus is completely different. With Thanos, half. That's it. Really simple, just half. But Amit apparently is more deliberate. However, she's a fucking hypocrite. Thanos is a purist. All he says is half. I don't care who, rich, poor, super educated, completely uneducated, scientific mind, artist, don't give a fuck. Butterflies, half of the butterflies are gone. Doesn't matter to Thanos. But with Amit, she says she's trying to stop evil before it happens. And yet she allows someone like Harrow to live, and point blank says, I'm keeping you around, even though the evil that will come is our future acts that you're doing, but it's in service of me. So, bitch, what the fuck are you trying to say? You're telling him that he's going to do bad things in your service. Therefore, shouldn't you off yourself? What is happening here? What is your system of justice? Is complete bullshit. So for me, Thanos being a dice thrower and just leaving everything up to chance, and Amit being far more deliberate, supposedly. But also Thanos was very clear. The man never lied. He's like, listen, I'm out here to destroy half of the universe because we have limited resources. And Amit is saying you're going to do future bad shit, but who really knows? Especially now that she let Harrow live. So I don't trust that bitch. You know what you're getting with Thanos. You have no idea what you're getting with Amit.
That strikes another difference between the two of them, which is Thanos worked and succeeded, and Amit very much did not. Because I'm very confused about how someone who can see everyone's future, including Harrow's, couldn't see how badly this was all going to end, and not in the distant future, not 5 years down the road when people travel through time to fuck up your shit. 20 minutes later, you're going down in a kaiju battle to, one of your nemesis, while your avatar is going to get locked away in an asylum. So I'm confused about whether Amit can even see the future at all, and that maybe is entirely bullshit. I don't know.
Amit's totally full of shit.
Oh yeah. That was my ultimate takeaway, that Amit doesn't really have scales. Amit just kind of coin flips, and
it's vibes, baby. We're about the vibes here.
Exactly.
I think Amit actually preys on the vulnerable, people who are susceptible to cult leaders, people who aren't going to ask a lot of questions and just be like, okay, yeah, I'm down for that. Let me go touch people and kill them.
Yeah. And what if the definition of evil and the future that she sees isn't, are you going to actually commit an evil act? It's, are you going to fall in line with me?
Correct.
So she can't actually see the future. She can just kind of get a feeling like you're too independent, off with your head.
So, Jesse, to what extent does the show have an obligation to clarify any of this for us? Like, or I guess maybe, would you have preferred that to this sort of open-ended question of whether Amit can see the future or any of that?
I would be more okay with an open-ended version of this if we got to see a little bit more of the ambiguity. We see hints of it throughout, where Harrow is okay killing that man in the park, not because that man's evil, but because that man's in his way.
Right.
There's a point where whatever the moral system or system of judgment that's going on here completely gives way to utilitarianism. If it gets me my goal, it's fine. Same reason Harrow stays alive. So obviously there's that undercurrent there. But we really only explore it in those two moments. And Harrow leads a cult. He leads people who truly believe in whatever it is Amit is setting out to do. And he has enough people involved where he can rally a small army in Egypt, where he's got his crew in England, etc. And we never really get to see them respond to these inconsistencies. And it seems like a pretty big thing. If you've fallen in line because you believe you found the moral equation of the universe and you've fallen on the right side of it, I want to see them respond. I want to see how they respond to the moment of deliverance coming, of Amit being back on Earth, and her basically saying, I'm just putting all that shit to the wayside because I want to give you a purple staff and shoot off some lasers.
Well, let's talk about another knockoff. Kristine, true or false? Layla was just a knockoff Falcon.
You are so rude with this question. No, she was not a knockoff Falcon. Big time false.
Are you sure? Because like she did all the same moves. She used her wings to like block bullets and lasers and stuff. And she kind of flew around and the wings even looked like Falcon. And the color scheme was even kind of similar to the original Falcon. I don't know. Are you sure she wasn't a knockoff Falcon?
Yeah, I'm totally sure. And by that, I mean, she is no Sam. She's no Sam. I know that Sam is supposed to be fucking Captain America and shit now. We probably shouldn't refer to him as Falcon. But of course, like, she's got wings and shit. She's a fucking bird or whatever the bird god is in Egypt.
She is the Scarlet Scarab. We'll talk about how little they really nodded to that correctly in a second.
Yeah, but like, just because she can fly does not make her Falcon. Just because she uses wings. I mean, the biggest thing for me in terms of like their personalities and whatnot, like Layla didn't decide to become an avatar, or actually Layla didn't decide to not become an avatar over and over and over again because she didn't think she was worthy of taking up the mantle, right? She didn't do it because she didn't fucking trust Khonshu and she didn't want to be a slave. So like, to me, that was the biggest difference between Falcon and Layla. Yes, she's running around in a Birdman suit, but that's it. That's not enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, look, does she have mechanical wings? Yes. Does she use them in the exact same way? Yes. Did they probably borrow some CGI from Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Definitely. But character-wise, yeah, completely different, I think.
Yeah.
I'm still confused about why a water hippo god's avatar is a bird. Like, Khonshu and Moon Knight made some sense to me. You know, Khonshu walks around. He's got his suit. He says it's I can't remember exactly what the armor is called, but it's some sort of special magical armor that takes the shape and form of the personality of his avatar, which is why it changes. That was at least given some explanation. Taweret just seems to have a bird costume ready, which I'm not sure if that's just what she made up in the moment, if that's what she felt fit Layla, or maybe Layla is just a huge Falcon fan. And so Taweret went into her mind and was like, who's your favorite hero? Sam Wilson.
You could do worse. I do have some information on that, I think, basically, after my rewatch. So she is called the Scarlet Scarab. That is the name of her hero. That's on like the Marvel.com pages. There is a comic book character named the Scarlet Scarab who appeared in some comics called like The Invaders, which was like a World War II style comic. I'm not sure that the Scarlet Scarab appeared in the original 40s run of that, but he definitely appeared in like the early 70s version of that. But the reason she's got those wings is because of that scarab device that was put on Mark Spector's chest, and then Layla picked it up and was like floating it around. So it was the scarab plus the wings. So I guess technically she's got bug wings and not bird wings. So that's a thing.
But wouldn't that be for Amit, though? Because the scarab was supposed to point to where Amit's Ubshapti was, right? I'm sorry,
Ubshapti,
I'm completely butchering that word. But wasn't it supposed to point to that? Therefore, shouldn't it be associated with Amit? Shouldn't Harrow be running around with a nice pair of wings on? Harrow got totally robbed, by the way. Totally robbed.
By the
All
way,
he got was a king.
True. he got a knockoff version of Loki's scepter from the first Avengers movie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there is one knockoff you guys will commit to. The scepter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, well, there's that. Look, for the record, I agree. Layla is not a knockoff of Falcon. I'm not at all convinced by your arguments that Amit is not a knockoff of Thanos. I mean, I hear you on the line by line, but spiritually, I feel like I'm disappointed in the derivative nature of all of that. But let's talk about our main character now, because a whole lot of stuff happened there, too. And I have some questions, and I'm going to put them in the form of true or false. I'm going to start with you, Jesse. This whole series seemed to be about Mark Spector making peace with the existence of Stephen Grant, and Stephen Grant coming to understand the nature of his existence and his role as part of Mark Spector's identity and consciousness. By the end of the series, they are inseparable. They've, like I said at the beginning, formed a stable relationship. They seem to know what's going on. It's all about pulling down these walls of, blindness and sort of willful ignorance, and also understanding, by accepting what your past and what you've been through and what you've seen, like how to sort of blend these personalities into some sort of, sustainable existence. And then at the end, we get the appearance of the third face, finally, Jake Lockley, who apparently murdered everyone in the climax of the show that we didn't even get to see. And Mark and Steven didn't ask any questions about that. Don't seem at all to be interested in asking any of the questions about the other shit that Jake Lockley clearly did previously in the series, which is why we've kept talking about the inevitable appearance of this third person. So Jesse, true or false, the appearance of Jake Lockley and Mark and Steven's willful ignorance of all of the signs pointing to his existence invalidated the entire character arc of the series and undid everything we'd seen Mark and Steven work towards.
I'm going to go 0.75 true.
Okay. All right.
More true than false. Yeah. I think it doesn't take apart what Mark and Steven earned and built. They had that connection. They resolved some part of the division / break in him. The problem is that the presence of Jake Lockley, as we saw beginning in episode 4 and kind of as a through line to the last 2 episodes of the series, is that clearly something was going on. Clearly, they were both blacking out. There was somebody else who was taking control of that body. And not only did they never address it, but I feel like the show didn't give us enough to justify them never addressing it. Like Mark could fight to get Steven back from the Duat. Mm-hmm. And they could fight on Tararet's ship to right the scales. But the thing that never made any sense is clearly there is something else going on here. And there's just no question. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it almost felt forced the way the show towards the end, especially as Mark and Steven were talking to Khonshu, and we're saying, the two of us want out of this deal. You have to release the two of us. And it never triggers in anyone's head, in either of their heads, that there might be a third one, or there might be something else going on here, and we need to ask some questions. We need to investigate. We need to figure out. And the scene that really took me out of this episode is when we do get the final transition to Jake before the credits, where he kills everybody. Harrow's about to beat him, and then all of a sudden he's got Harrow on the verge of death. Mm-hmm. And the only thing Layla says is, "What the hell happened?" And then we just move on to the next 4 scenes where they put Ahmed in Harrow, and they put Harrow in a psychiatric hospital, but then they're also back in their mind psychiatric hospital with their fake Harrow. And then they're back in Steven's flat. And it's like, could someone at some point deal with the 800-pound gorilla or the 800-pound hippo or whatever Egyptian animal you want to refer to? Somebody should deal with this in a show that is about dealing with your trauma and dealing with what makes you potentially a lethal killer. So yeah, I feel like it didn't entirely undercut what Mark and Steven got, but it just seemed like a massive blind spot for the show not to deal with it. Like the characters had to act in a way that was completely inconsistent with what they'd learned and who they developed to become in order for Jake Lockley to be a surprise reveal at the end.
So, Jesse, I feel like I would say everything you said to back up my false claim. And I feel like this is a false statement. And I probably feel that way. I'm a textualist, so I'm going to read back the part that is making me say false, and that it invalidated the entire arc of the series, undoing everything we'd seen Mark and Steven work towards. And to me, this just represents an incomplete arc. They have been saying, like you said, since episode 4, they have noticed there's a third guy. They just refuse to fucking acknowledge it. And we need to understand why. So they've made progress. They've acknowledged each other. You know, Mark is saying, I made Steven. Steven was my coping mechanism. Steven made progress accepting the fact that Mark created him and the fact that his mother is dead. Together, they now still have further to go to acknowledge Jake. So I don't think any work has been undone. They're still doing the work, or they still have work left to do. They are most definitely not doing the work, or else they'd be like, remember that sarcophagus that we just didn't look at back in the doo-wop? Like, what was that about? Yeah, no, they haven't done that. So they're not doing the work. So there's more arc to come.
That makes some sense to me. Except, I also wonder about things like, I don't know, those dead hospital workers who are, clearly killed by Jake Lockley. And Khonshu seems fine with all of that. And I don't know how the vengeance comes into play. And since Khonshu's whole thing is you got to do bad stuff before you get murdered, it also kind of struck me that, on top of, for me at least, undoing most everything we've seen from Mark and Steven, it also kind of undid what we'd learned about Khonshu and in theory sort of what the difference was between him and Ahmed. If it's just kill multiple just, social workers functionally to get this guy out of a hospital, what are we doing here?
I mean, remember Khonshu was like, put the kid over the ledge. It'll be fine. Just put him over the ledge.
The kid was a criminal, at least. The kid was trying to fight and kill him. I mean, these hospital guys didn't do that.
But still a kid.
All right,
listen,
but I mean,
Khonshu
talk to me about the medical workers.
Khonshu ain't shit. Khonshu ain't shit. None of these gods are shit. None of them. There's so much madness happening in the world. What are the other fucking gods doing? Chilling underground in their little god's palace or whatever. I mean, at least they're not doing anything. So yay for them. They're probably the best out of everyone else we've seen. But gods are not to be trusted.
No, that's fine. I guess I don't know what the point of telling a story about that is, but I hear you on that.
That's my main question at the end of the day is what was the lesson in this show?
Yeah, we'll expand that wide in a second. So let's stick with Mark and Steven for a second, Kristine. I've got one last true or false, and then I'm just going to turn it over to y'all, and you can do what you will with the rest of this podcast. I was really struck by lines like Mark's really out of nowhere line to Steven, which was, my only real superpower was you. And also, Mark being incredibly grateful for Steven always being there for him and never running away. And he's not alone now. And how excited he is to have this buddy who he really wants to stick around. Now, I am not an expert in psychology or medicine, but what I do know about DID and the treatment for DID, it is not to encourage things like ongoing multiple personalities and fostering this kind of super unhealthy relationship, which the show treats as a heroic breakthrough for this character or characters. So I guess for you, Kristine, my true or false is this series winds up glamorizing dissociative identity disorder.
True.
Oh my God, I got a true from you guys. I got full true.
You got...
All right, I'm retiring.
You got 100% true for me. And this line is incredibly problematic for me. Now, all of the disclaimers that Mark laid down, I also laid down. I have never even so much as taken a psychology class in my entire life. Okay, guys, I went to business school for undergrad. Like, I know nothing. But when I heard that line, I literally went, what? And like rewound it to be like, am I sure I heard what I just heard? I understand the sentiment behind the statement. I think what they were trying to do there is just show Mark being grateful for Steven and the role that Steven plays in his life. I mean, he created Steven for a reason. Steven is part of his survival. And so to acknowledge Steven's strength in being so positive, in letting nothing bother him, in just being this effervescent, lovely man, Mark says something he shouldn't fucking say. Like, I understand we're in a superhero show. We haven't ever said the word superhero, I think, until this episode, and then it's twice. So it's a little heavy-handed, but this was not a good thing to say. The sentiment is a good one, I think, and the thank you, I love you, I need you, let's do this together, you're amazing. But don't say that the person that you created, this identity that you created, that seems to be a wholly separate person within your being, is your superpower. That might be very ableist of me to say. I'll acknowledge that.
Maybe. But again, as far as everything I know, and again, not an expert, but I don't think you'll find very many people that are like, definitely make peace with that.
Yeah, no, I cringed.
And the problem I had is that if you look at the text of the show, Steven is a denial response. Mm-hmm. He is a place that Mark can go when things are at their worst, and he needs to not be Mark anymore. He needs to be this genteel British man with a different life who doesn't know about all of the terrible things Mark has done. Mm-hmm. And so to say my real superpower is to be able to avoid the repercussions of the things I've done and to avoid acknowledging or having to experience my abusive parent, that just does not seem like a superpower. Like that seems like a problem.
Veins are popping out of my forehead.
I'm just trying to like.
Damn, Jesse, lay it out for everybody.
I'm just trying to wrap this together, and like one. Again, you just look at the text of the show. His superpower is having a magic moon suit. Like, can we all agree that that's the actual superpower? But setting all that aside, it's just a way. Again, if you look at their relationship, that line, and then as Kristine pointed out, the additional denial / avoidance therein about Jake Lockley, it reads much more like them trying to put a salve on everything and move forward rather than dealing with the issues that are still very clearly there. And again, not a psychologist, but from a psychology perspective, like that's not dealing with the issues. That's not addressing. That's not healing yourself. That's just saying, okay, I like reached a point. I made one big breakthrough. And I have gone to therapy, and it is very tempting to do this. You make the one big breakthrough. Like you realize I do X because of Y. And you're like, I'm healed. Like I don't need to do anything else. Right. I acknowledge that and I'm good now. And you're generally not. You generally need more work. You need more recognition. You need more breakthroughs in order to fully cope with whatever it is you've realized. And it does feel like what Marc and Steven reached was like that first level of breakthrough in therapy that requires a lot more work in the years to come.
I wonder if I could polish this turd a little bit, because there's a line that I keep thinking back to, and that was Steven cowering on Towerwit's ship and going, oh, if I'm him, then I can do the same things he can do. And then he shows Marc, look at this, I'm a badass too. I could beat people up. Like, I couldn't do that before because I am you. I'm just the nice coping mechanism version of you, but I'm still you. So I'm wondering if maybe Marc is saying to Steven in that moment that, like, I don't know. You know what? It sounded better in my head, and now that I'm saying it, I'm like, no, this is still bullshit. But I feel like there's something about that moment that can be applied here. And it's like, I tried and failed.
Part of why I love talking about this show with y'all is, again, just like with last week with Maeve and Amanda, y'all opened my eyes to stuff and turned me around on some things. And so weirdly, this is the hill I probably would have died on the most before we started talking tonight, was just that this was way, way, way out of line. But Kristine, what you were talking about earlier around Jake Lockley is maybe the way to polish this turd, which is to say, and everything Jesse was just saying about how, you know, these not false breakthroughs, these initial breakthroughs that are treated like final breakthroughs in therapy by the person often, you know, experiencing that therapy. Like, maybe it is the case that Jake Lockley is the key to this unfinished story about Steven and Marc feeling like everything is great and wonderful. I mean, they do literally end the episode chained still to the wall and falling over and kind of drooling on the floor. So there are signs that if you want to trust this as a continuing narrative, which we don't have any confirmation of, but neither do we have any guarantee that it is not, because they did change this from a series finale to a season finale, as I've seen on the internet. Mm-hmm. Maybe the part of the thing we will get is some recognition from Steven and Marc that this is not hunky-dory. So y'all sort of turned me around on the one thing I felt strongest about. And so, you know, and that's the only one I got a true on. So I'm like shooting my own self in the foot here. That's great.
Yeah. Good job, Marc. I did not mean to do that for you,
Hashtag
Marc.
Nailed it. All right. Look, I clearly have my issues with this. Y'all have already, though, brought up some really good nuanced points around Amit, around Layla. So let me just get the hell out of the way. I'm going to turn over to you, Kristine. And you guys can take this. Where do you want to go from here? What do we do?
Well, I think Jesse and I had very similar questions that fit neatly into a Marc Faletti sized box called Make It Make Sense.
I love order.
I know, you're an order Muppet. I'm an order Muppet too. I think Jesse might also be an order Muppet.
We're lawyers. Lawyers are all order Muppets.
Yeah, we need a chaos Muppet. I might be the closest to a chaos Muppet.
Jesse, you are a chaos Muppet. I reject. True or false? Jesse is an order Muppet? False. Jesse, you love miscellaneous is like my nickname for you on this show. Like, you love taking us like spiraling out into, you know, some sort of cosmic whatever, which is why, I mean, I always love talking to you about this stuff, because I feel like there's some great yin and yang there. But if you're an order Muppet, I don't know what that makes me.
He's going to turn this into an ultimatum episode again, Marc, if you're not careful. So, like, I don't know about turning the reins over fully to me and Jesse.
much like every Egyptian god, I believe that I have a system of order that is ironclad.
Jesse's full of shit, everybody.
Right. But in the best possible way. All right. So make it make sense. That's where you want to take this. That's what you're calling this. What does that mean?
Yes. Make this make sense. You're trying to have us pull you off a ledge. Mark, I'm on the ledge there with you. And I think Jesse might be as well with this episode. So like, we need you to help us make sense of some of this shit. For example, when they have this Ammit-possessed Harrow on the altar, Khonshu orders Mark to finish both Harrow and Ammit because he says Ammit will kill again. And Mark refuses to and says that Khonshu sounds just like Ammit for wanting Ammit and Harrow dead. But does he?
No, because Arthur Harrow has done bad shit, right? Like Ammit's whole thing is kill people who, and this is what y'all were always saying when we would talk about this. Ammit's all about, preemptive strikes, right? In the, military industrial parlance of our times. And Arthur Harrow has done bad shit. And on top of that, Mark and Steven don't seem the least bit concerned about all of the dead people that we missed in Jake Lockley's murder spree during the climax that didn't actually happen in the episode because we didn't get to watch it. So if those people were worthy of being killed, how is Arthur Harrow not being worthy of being killed?
I mean, if you have a show that's set up in this superhero, supervillain format, everything about Harrow is coded as bad. And the thing we see from the very first episode is that he takes the life of this sweet old, kidney pie making lady in England for no apparent reason. And then he kills and he kills and he kills again. And he kind of tries to justify it. He was Khonshu's former avatar, so he's been mistreated, so he deserves to mistreat other people. But that's all given the lie. It's all bullshit. And so Khonshu doesn't sound like Ammit for wanting the person who just tried to provoke yet another MCU genocide.
Oh, man.
To die.
It's true. I mean, how many souls did Ammit eat and grow into kaiju size as a direct result of Arthur Harrow's actions?
And did you notice in the previous episode, they went straight into the Dua? They didn't even get picked up by a fucking boat. The spirits went straight into the fucking sand. No chance for y'all of making it to the reeds. You're going straight into the fucking dirt.
Oh, that's terrible. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Oh, I've been thinking about that since last week. It's so fucked up. How could, this shit has been done. They did it in front of your fucking face, Mark. How could you not feel justified in being Khonshu's fist of vengeance then?
And there's no undoing of it, as far as I can tell. Unlike a lot of the bad things that have happened in the MCU, no rewind button here. Just all those people in Cairo are dead.
Right. Dead.
And for somebody who's been the fist of vengeance against not only, the evil jackals that we kind of haven't seen in a while, but also the numerous nameless soldiers that Moon Knight has fought and killed and done everything else to. The fact that the time that you question this is when it's Ammit and Harrow, that, again, if we're going back to therapy, this feels like the time where you got the lesson from therapy and you just completely misapplied it.
Oh, no.
It's an episode of Lucifer is what it is. It's a fucking episode of Lucifer. Oh, God. So nobody can make that make sense. Okay, thank you.
Nope. Strike one for us.
So we've talked about Jake Lockley quite a bit. And the fact that Mark and Steven kind of ignored him, and it had to sort of happen that way in order for us to get the end credit scene and for us to set up season 2 of Moon Knight. What struck me as particularly awkward in this episode was that when Mark and Steven were attempting to negotiate their freedom from being Moon Knight, from being in Khonshu's employ / being his slave, is that they kept saying, "You'll free the two of us. You'll free the two of us." And it was very much setting up the idea that, you knew that the twist was coming. You knew that something was going to happen because it wasn't, are you going to free me?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you going to stop the whole Moon Knight thing and find a completely different avatar? It was, will you free the two of us? So kind of two questions here. The first is, did you feel that that was awkward? And did you believe that Mark and Steven would have phrased the request in that way in order to give Khonshu that out?
I think subconsciously they know that Jake is there.
Mm-hmm.
They must, because we were in their subconscious during the whole duat, right? So like that third sarcophagus was there. They know it's there. They are just choosing to ignore it. I think that's them saying, yeah, free the two of us, because the third person is down with his job. Jake's good with it. But you got to remember, Jake is also Steven and Mark, because that's what Steven discovers before he goes and fights everyone. Like, we are the same person. We are. So the two of them are also Jake, which means they also love their fucking job. But they have these distinct personalities, so they're not supposed to love the job. So they're like, listen, we're out. But the third guy that we refuse to acknowledge, that we don't know about, we're pretending we don't know about, not pretending, they probably don't know about him because he's in their fucking subconscious. They're like, he could go and do his thing. We're not going to stop him because he loves his job. Clearly.
Yeah, my best version of this would be they're just so delighted with the idea that they accept their relationship. They are giddy throughout the entire episode about figuring this out, that they're just very excited to say the both of us, the two of us, that kind of a thing. On my rewatch, I vaguely recall Khonshu being the first person to say, I'll release the two of you. I feel like Steven might have said something like, release us, and then he said, I'll release
us.
the two of you. Yeah, and then they pick up that language from Khonshu.
Yeah.
So again, I think Khonshu was kind of lawyering them a little bit, and then they kind of picked that up. But they then do pick that language up, Jesse, and so it does feel weird. But if you accept that the Mark and Steven go along to get along, make their happy DID life together thing is like a satisfying part of the story, then I think I could argue that this is among the lesser sins.
So, Mark, I am so glad you said that, because I wrote in my notes, Khonshu is a lawyer, clearly. But then I was like, oh, maybe I'm forgetting this wrong, because I thought Khonshu said the two of them, because when I heard Mark say us, I thought he meant him and Layla.
Oh, right.
And then I was like, oh shit, he wasn't talking about Layla. He was talking about him and Steven. Whoa, what a dick, kind of. But then I remembered Layla's isn't Khonshu's to free anyway. So that was when I was like, oh, okay. So I had my own little thing like the first couple of times that I watched it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that it was Khonshu that came up with the two of us. I literally just came up with that bullshit about the two of them not wanting to acknowledge Jake on the fly just now, because I was like, oh, clearly I'm wrong, and I forgot all of that. I'm remembering it wrong.
No, I mean, I think that could be part of it too. I think it all kind of fits together. Again, if you're going with a really good faith interpretation of this episode, I think that all fits together.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a good lawyer trick, actually. Like, for any baby lawyers who are listening, or anybody who's, getting into the field, one of the best techniques you can use, especially at deposition, is if somebody uses an unclear phrase, repeat it back to them and then define it for them and see if they'll pick up the definition. And then that way, all your questioning and all your answer revolves around your definition and your phraseology rather than theirs.
Jesse's tricky. He's a tricky man.
Don't play chess with Jesse, man.
I will say, though, that this scene made me concerned for Mark and Steven, because it seemed as though Khonshu's going to try to make sure they never know about Jake.
Right. I mean, how is that going to work? I don't know. I mean,
Make it make sense, Mark.
I mean, well, this actually gets to my next question, which is that, at the end of the show, assuming that what we see is, in fact, their real life, it looks like where Mark and Steven end up is back at the flat, tethered to the bed, and kind of in the same place the show started, except each of them knows the other is there at this point. Why, of all the ways that their life could turn out, would they choose that? And where's Layla?
Yeah, I assume Layla's kicking it back in Egypt now that she's feeling like, hey, I am the Egyptian superhero. That was a cool moment for folks. I'm into that. That was cool. And maybe she's just like, hey, it would be nice if like not all superheroes lived in New York City. I like New York City, but come on, folks. So maybe she's kicking it back there. It is weird that we got no closure on their marriage or relationship status whatsoever. And yes, it's now that Steven doesn't even have a job at the museum, it's unclear what they're going to do with themselves or why they would need to chain themselves up. Maybe this goes to Kristine's point that there's some sort of maybe subconscious awareness of this third person. But like, I just think if you know that you're two badasses now, you could at least get work, I don't know, as a stuntman in movies. England is where everybody films all these movies now anyway. Just go work for the MCU. Go full meta. Take a stuntman job. I don't know.
Also, London is an incredibly expensive place to live with no job.
Yeah, sell that apartment and you'll probably be set for life.
So, boys, why do you think it was that when Khonshu, quote unquote, released Mark and Steven, they went back to the Mind Palace psych ward? Like, what the fuck was that? So they had already been brought back to life by Khonshu. They were out of the land of the dead. They were firmly in the land of the living. How could they have possibly gone back? Because the psych ward was the Duat. So was his journey through the Duat Khonshu all along?
So here's my theory, is that it was a little gift from Taweret that she, and by the way, I'm completely writing this in my head. I made up my own deleted scene.
They are making us fill the gaps, Jesse, so go right ahead.
So, in my head where I don't have to pay to do the CGI, Taweret really likes Mark and Steven. And they are some of her favorite people that she's ever escorted through. She thought it was real funny that they did this in a psych ward because she'd never seen it before. And so as they have sort of wrapped up the whole Amit thing, maybe she says, hey, you want a little bit more time to kind of wrap up with Harrow and your Duat? I don't know what you call it. Your Duat. It's not a fantasy. Your Duat experience. Okay. Do you want to go ahead and wrap that up?
Your cruise, your Duat cruise.
I know. It's actually going to be a new part of Disney.
Oh my god,
the Duat.
You get to actually see all the shit that's going to happen in your life, Amit style, on the boat, and then decide if you want to leave the cruise or just like go into oblivion. Sure.
They'll sell little crystal hearts at the gift shop, only $75 a pop. Jesus. And so that's the only way I can make sense of it, is that it was something that Taweret gave them so that they could feel as if they'd wrapped up with both Harrows and they could move on with their life.
So if anyone ever says, like, what is the importance of a set designer to television or movies? Use this example. This confusion is something to circle back to. And here's why. Because in the last episode, what was unclear from visual cues was that this reality, the psychology office of the fake Dr. Harrow, was separate from the also super white asylum that they were running around in with Taweret, because they would wake up in and out of the asylum into the office. In other words, so there are three realities in episode 5. There's the real reality of, where Mark is dying. There's the reality inside of Mark's mind, which is where Dr. Harrow is. And then there is the asylum that is the afterlife, the organizing principle of the afterlife in the Duat. And because of the incredibly similar visual language of those last two, this feels super confusing. But if you rewatch episode 5, you will see Mark and Steven traveling in and out of the Harrow office into the asylum in a way where they are clearly like in a sort of disassociative state again. And so I think that what we have here at the ending of this is Mark and Steven finalizing their processing of the two of them coming together, and again, kind of in a super unhealthy way, in my opinion, my unqualified opinion, to figure out how they're going to work and live together, and that they are dismissing the brief appearance of this Dr. Harrow that was sort of a bridge, concept that their psyche put together to help them kind of work through this. But this is separate from the asylum reality. But set designers should do a much, much better job of signaling that this is not the same reality as that asylum. And they did not do that.
I mean, or they did a good job in order to confuse the shit out of us, but you needed it for this particular episode.
Yes.
Like, I remember you talking about this during Storycast. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to talk to Mark about how wrong he is. There are only 2. And now I'm like, oh, no, there are clearly 3. Okay, Mark knows what the fuck he's talking about.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, the broken clock is right twice a day. But this one I do think I've got right. But it is rare because the MCU pays such close attention to these things. Normally, we do not normally struggle to sort of understand the visual language of the MCU. But I don't know why they didn't think about making this literally any other color in his office that would have signaled that this, as long as it wasn't purple or white, those were the only 2 colors claimed in this series, and they could have done any other color for him.
Well, and we also get the contrast between Harrow's office and Harrow's own psychiatric hospital.
Sure, right. Which is yellow and gross, right?
Yeah, like kind of has a greenish yellow tinge to it. It looks much more gross and institutional and real world, so that you're no longer in, not only are you no longer in Mark and Steven's head, but you also don't appear to be in any sort of supernatural space. But yeah, you're right. I did not catch that the hospital and the office were 2 different planes. Like that just did not read.
Look, maybe I'm wrong, but if we go back and watch 5, I think you will see that he's like, it's a way station of his psyche that is awkwardly employed thanks to the visual language of the show.
Well, you still helped make this scene make sense, so kudos to you with the 3 different planes. Was this a dream then?
I think it was a representation of his mind doing some repair work, I think is what I would say about it. It's still a strange concept, right? That he would bring in Arthur Harrow of all people as the arbiter of his, but he clearly at the end is treating, again, another weird thing about this. I wonder if there are a lot of Scientologists on this show or something, like in the writer's room, because you could argue that this is really anti-Shrink by like making Harrow this person who's trying to help him, and then obviously at the end is totally useless and terrible, and who needs psychiatrists when you can just live with your multiple personalities, which for folks who don't know, Scientology is like super against psychiatry.
Yeah.
But also the imagery of the spirits like coming into the Duat or going into Amit's mouth. It's like how I would imagine the spirits that were like, released from the smoking planet, or I forget what part of Scientology dogma this is, but there's a part about like
the
spirits being
Thetans.
trapped or something. Yes, the Thetans.
Yes, like again, I mean, Scientology is fundamentally based on a mythology about a space genocide and trapped souls as a result of that genocide.
Look at this.
Did we just crack a case of what the hell is going
this
on
show is about?
In this show?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it is such a weird choice. I can't believe I didn't think about this before. It is such a fucked up choice that the representation of the psychologist is the avatar of, what is presumably, I guess, the show's villain.
Well, and I'll also point out that the way that Scientology replaces therapy is to constantly relive bad memories until it's felt as if you've processed them. Like that is the method of Scientology's quote unquote therapy. And if we look at what Mark and Steven did, it's that Mark kept reliving the worst moment of his life, and rather than deal with it, created this alternate personality to avoid it. But it was only until he relived it and finally had that breakthrough of reliving the trauma that he was finally, quote unquote, healed.
Yeah.
And he rejected the therapy. He rejected the drugs. He rejected everyone who was trying to help him in those formal ways. And in his mind, he just kind of did it himself, which is, again, a very Scientology way of dealing with things like this.
We made it make sense.
Oh my God. But in the worst possible way. All right. What else do you have for us, Kristine?
Okay. So I think I might have my own theory on this. Maybe. I think I've gone back and forth now during the course of our conversation. But why did the scales balance? And I'm going back an episode. Sorry, folks. Why did the scales balance when Jake wasn't a part of the evaluation? You know, because there were moments when I questioned the whole reality of the duat, right? But like when Tara started talking through dead people's in order to converse with Layla, I was like, okay, no, the duat is some real shit. Okay, good. I'm convinced now that it's real. But to me, the Jake question is huge to resolve, because if part of the whole gig of the duat is to get you to a place of peace, inner peace, how could you possibly get there without acknowledging a whole third of your existence?
And the only way I could put that together is that Jake is something that is so divorced from both Mark and Steven, so locked away, so segregated, that however the duat judges that balance, Jake was so far gone from who they are that it didn't count for whatever reason. So whatever Jake is, whoever Jake is not part of Mark and Steven. He is something else entirely that takes over at, you might call it the worst possible moment or whatever, however you want to refer to it. But that's really the only way I could put it together, is that when Mark and Steven step into the duat considers them to be the parts of this psyche that are being evaluated, because they're the ones who live in conflict and eventually in harmony with each other. Whereas Jake, I guess, is just considered something entirely separate from that psyche altogether. Either that, or much like Khonshu and Amit, Taweret is also full of shit. And she just really liked having a happy ending and wanted to see somebody get through to the field of reeds. So, like, what if she just controls the scale? And it's like, really, you don't get to go through until she decides. There's no greater power than her deciding.
That's a pretty good answer, Jesse. Like, that's better than I could do, because I am on team. There's no way to make this make sense. The whole thing is the weighing of the heart, and they don't know until they resolve the Stephen Mark thing how this works. And obviously, again, based on his wanton murder of innocent, hospital workers, Jake Lockley has done horrible shit that needs to be accounted for. And the heart, I mean, look, I guess there's different parts of the brain, maybe where these guys are residing or whatever. But the heart is, there's still only one. And it's just, that is how the Egyptians manage this stuff. And it's a weird thing to leave that hanging. And it just makes me think that they got caught up in sort of the emotional symbolism of the two of these characters resolving their shit, and wanted the shock value of Jake in this post-credits scene more than they really wanted sort of a coherent resolution. Because how would this field of reed situation have resolved itself? Where was Jake if Steven was outside in the duat and Mark was in the field of reeds? Where the hell was Jake? And that's why I hate to do this, because I know people get theories in their heads and then they get mad when their theories aren't true. But it would have been so much better if these extra personalities were just souls that had come along with Mark Spector when he was resurrected by Khonshu, than if it turned out that he had full-on DID, because all of this would make sense if with a supernatural explanation and would be much more compelling from a story perspective. I understand that could be also perceived as belittling or ignoring mental health issues. But if you're talking about threading the needle, I think they would have had a much better chance of doing it that way than the way that they did it here. So I don't see a way to make it make sense. But Jesse, you did, make a much better case than I could have.
And again, this is not in the text of the show. This is not something I'm pulling out. There's no scene I'm looking back at. It's just, if you got to make sense of it, here's an explanation.
Yeah. I love the Tarot is full of shit one, because I'm just like, yeah, that works. That works. To me, I was just like, okay, maybe it wasn't about getting to the Field of Reeds. Maybe it was really always about getting to the Gates of Osiris. That it was about coming back to life. It wasn't really about the scales or anything like that. It was about setting up a scenario to see whether or not at least these two are worthy of going back to fight another day on planet Earth. And who knows why the gods have the evaluations that they do. I mean, we've been talking about this for several episodes now. What the fuck is Khonshu about? What the fuck is Ammit really about? Tararet now is full of shit. Like, so who knows what exactly the calculus is for getting through the Gates of Osiris, but it was enough for Osiris that Mark came back for Steven. And it was all a test for that because Osiris is Khonshu's boy. It was like, all right, this is the avatar of Khonshu. Let's see if we could go back. And the leaps that we have to take to make this shit make sense is just wild to me and is a sign of very bad storytelling. I'm just going to put that out plainly.
The other wild thing is we get Mark's explanation about what happened to Layla's father was that his partner did the killing. I feel like we will learn if there is a future season. First of all, it's weird that all got left hanging in this show. There's no guarantee that we're going to get continued information. But I think we're probably going to learn that said partner who murdered all of those archaeologists, again, totally innocent people, was Jake Lockley. And that's probably partly what, the partner was actually him all along, just like all this other stuff. And so again, it makes it extra weird that those scales could possibly have balanced because we know Ta Weret knows Layla's father. She says that to Layla. How could any of this hang together? I'm struggling.
There was a pop culture reference that popped into my head looking at the structure of the kind of final action scene of this show. And the thing that we always seem to get in the final episode of every MCU show is multi-tier action. There always has to be, our lead protagonist is fighting and our secondary protagonist is fighting and plot lines are being wrapped up in multiple locations, multiple fights, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Power Rangers was just at the kind of tail end of my kids show phase, et cetera, et cetera. Are you all familiar with the normal structure of an episode of Power Rangers?
No.
I can honestly say I think this is one of those rare moments again where our minor age gap is taking strong effect.
You precious millennial. No.
Oh.
We're too old for that shit. You're going to have to educate us.
I'm going to lay out the structure, which is significantly less complicated than the ultimatum.
Our little chaos Muppet. Go ahead.
I know. Every episode of Power Rangers has 3 tiers of fight. And do you know the basic premise of Power Rangers?
There's people who fight evil.
Yeah. Okay.
They have colors. My niece liked the pink one. That's all I
the pink one's cool.
By the way, this show, when you look back on Power Rangers with any distance, you realize how fucking racially problematic that show was.
Don't tell me they had an Asian character in yellow.
Yes.
No.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And the black character was the Black Ranger.
Oh my God.
Jesus.
Okay. So anyway.
Goodness gracious, Jesse.
Jesus Christ.
So you, big Power Ranger fan, were you?
I know. Short version is, you had some high school kids that could turn into the Power Rangers. Then when shit got too dicey, they could call on robots. I can't remember what they're called. Then they made like some kind of Voltron and they fought in a kaiju scene.
Sure.
So every episode is high school kids start out fighting as high school kids. Then they have to become Power Rangers. They put on their magic suits. Then when the magic suits aren't enough, they have to call down their robots to form a massive kaiju to fight off the other kaiju that the bad guy became.
Okay.
And it's pretty much the exact layout of the action scenes of this show. You have Moon Knight fighting like in his magic suit against the bad guy. And then you ultimately also have the two big kaiju that are there like, you know, exemplars fighting off against each other in another big magical battle. Now, this loses a lot of steam when you don't have any familiarity with Power Rangers. So I'm going to go on my other podcast with people my age.
Look, just because we don't get it doesn't mean the people listening don't get it.
But I'm seeing it. Like, I'm seeing the episode as you're describing the Power Rangers, you know? Because I was very confused about why they decided to parallel Harrow and Mark's fight with Amit and Kanju's fight. Like, it was the same positioning and everything. And I'm like, are these gods even fucking real? Like, it made me question reality because they were so parallel.
And I think the problem is that the MCU finale tends to require that you have like each main character gets their own fight scene against their own person to kind of wrap up their plot line. Like in Hawkeye fought Yelena and Kate Bishop fought Kingpin. In WandaVision, we had the Visions fighting each other, and then Wanda and Agatha fighting each other. And we see it, Falcon and Winter Soldier, everyone got their own face-offs as well. Well, here we had Moon Knight and Harrow. Layla didn't have anybody to face off against. There was no other like Layla scale protagonist to fight off against. So I think they just had to find some other parallel fight to give larger scale action to. And so they decided to make the two Egyptian gods really, really fucking big and have them wail on each other.
And I was so confused about that because when the souls were going into Amit and she started to grow, I was like, okay, that makes sense. She's a power hungry bitch. So she's doing all of this in order to get big. And then Khonshu was just as big as she was. And I'm like, what the fuck was that about?
Maybe Lockley just went and killed, like blew up a building somewhere, like a skyscraper somewhere real quick and just like loaded him up. I don't know.
Made no sense. Like, I understand what they did with Layla so that she would have to cover herself from all of that automatic fire in order to not see Jake Lockley do his business. But yeah, the other stuff I don't get. Unless they are like, yeah, we all watched Power Rangers as a kid. This would be cool if we did it this way.
Yeah, they probably did watch Power Rangers. So I remember a character from Power Rangers, Jesse, this like cackling evil sort of magician type lady, Rita Repulsa. So who is the Rita Repulsa of Moon Knight?
It was real weird. She would like come up with a monster each week, I think, and then send the monster down to Earth.
Sounds like Amit.
Sounds like Amit.
Yeah.
And her avatars.
Yeah. And then... But the thing is, I think the monsters could grow big, but Rita Repulsa was always the same size. So I think they kind of pressed that together because you couldn't really have like a third tier of bad guy that you introduced in this episode.
So like the Shrink's office where Harrow is the Shrink, but that's the third reality. You can't have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you visually code it so that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Amanda and I had a disagreement. Just real quick. So I have a couple other true or falses for you before we go. We don't have to dwell on them, even though they're big picture, because I think ultimately they're sort of subjective things that we can talk about. But I'd have one very minor one before I get to those. Could other people that were not the avatars see the kaiju fighting? Right, Khonshu and Amit were fighting. Do you think regular people could see them? Because obviously most of the time they cannot.
I don't think so. I don't think they could see the spirits leaving or anything like that. Well, now that I think about it, maybe they could see the purple of Harrow's staff, and maybe they could see whatever the purple was. I guess that was their soul being evaluated and then snatched up. But I highly doubt that once it truly left the body that they were able to see that or either of the gods fighting.
And I would agree with that also, just from a kind of MCU overload perspective. Like, I hope that the nice people of the MCU didn't see that, because they see so much shit on a regular basis that if the end of Moon Knight was basically one fight in a square and some souls being mysteriously taken, that at least is much less overwhelming than seeing all of that plus 20-story gods fighting each other.
Yeah, it's like banging around at the Great Pyramid, like just another Tuesday.
Yeah. But can somehow cause damage as they're fighting, like damage to mortal reality. I was also confused by that as well. Like, I can understand getting knocked around inside your own temple, but out and about when no one can see you, I don't think of them as not being able to be seen because they're invisible, or because like our eyes can't comprehend the greatness that is a god, but more like they're not corporal. So like, if they're not corporal, how can they fucking cause damage? I don't know. This shit's weird.
It's complicated. All right. So I'm going to give you each the final word on these last little true or false questions for you. Jesse, true or false? I asked you this in Hawkeye. I want to ask it again in light of our conversation here. The MCU has a finale problem.
True. And what's odd about Moon Knight is that it had a different finale problem than I think we saw in WandaVision and in Hawkeye. Where in WandaVision and Hawkeye, the main issues I had with the finales, and I liked WandaVision's finale a lot. I liked Hawkeye's a little bit less, but still thought it was solid. But in each case, the problem was they were setting up so many more stories. They were setting up other properties, other movies, other TV shows. I think when we did WandaVision, we counted, and it's setting up like at least 4 different movies / shows. And Hawkeye's setting up Echo. It's probably setting up Kate Bishop's entry into the MCU. And whatever's going to go on with Yelena / Kingpin / the Contessa, if that comes into being. So just setting up a lot. Moon Knight is completely divorced from any other MCU story as far as we know. Like, I don't anticipate seeing Moon Knight in Doctor Strange. It would be real weird if it happened. But you never know. But at least at this point, nothing about that show read as if they're setting up like another Phase 4 or Phase 5 movie, which meant that the finale wasn't saddled with that. It didn't have to sort of take away from the main plot in order to set up the next property. Instead, what you had was a show that was just like, we don't really know what the message is. We don't know what the takeaway is. We want things to be resolved. And so here's some things that we're calling resolutions. And we have one big twist that we want to set up that just kind of gets dumped in our lap when the credits start rolling. And so it's just, there's a finale problem. It's just a different problem than we see in other shows.
So Mark and Jesse saw me shaking my head furiously as the WandaVision slander continued in front of me.
He said it was
keeps getting the reference. He said it after he saw me shake my head. That was totally a CYA moment. But listen, Mark, you also brought up the WandaVision finale when you were like, I kind of feel shit about this, like I did about the shitty WandaVision finale. Paraphrasing, not quoting. And I'm just like, that finale was great. I don't care what anybody had to say about it. That finale was great. All the shit it set up, I am here for. I'm ready for the Marvels. I'm ready for the Multiverse of Madness. Set up all the shit you want to set up, Wanda. I am here for it. I am not mad at it. I 100% agree, though, however, with the critique of Hawkeye. Totally get that. I don't think the Falcon, Captain America and the Winter Soldier finale had the same problem. I think the show just had kind of bad writing and I was emotionally connected to it because I was filling in all of the gaps with my own personal shit, which I didn't realize until I did my own podcast on it. And they were critiquing it. I'm like, oh, but this happened. And they're like, no, bitch, that was in your head. And what was in your head? I wish it come out on the screen. And I was like, oh, that's why I like the show, because I filled in all the fucking gaps in my head. Yeah. So yes, there's a finale problem, but it's not unsolvable. Like, you know, I still say that they have an Act 3 problem. Right? There's a way of getting around that, and apparently it's working with Sony on a script.
Oh my God.
I mean, Far From Home had an amazing finale. We talked about this during Hawkeye. I stand by it now because you've got the emotional punch at the end. Now, maybe they tried to do that at this end. I don't think they succeeded with that, but I will say that the problem that Jesse brings up had me all fucked up at the end of this episode, because as soon as I saw this gloved hand and this person walking through, I'm like, oh, who's the new MCU character coming in now? Is that Blade? I kept thinking it was Blade the whole fucking time, because there were the gloves with you couldn't see any skin at all. And then they were coming out and I'm like, oh, is it black? Is it a black person? Is it Mahershala? Is it Mahershala? And then I saw the light skin. I'm like, oh no, who is that? But I have been programmed to think that this is going to set up some MCU property, not the next season of Moon Knight, but some new property. And I was completely in that headspace. So I can't say that Jesse is wrong here at all, because that's exactly where my brain went without any thought whatsoever.
Well, then I turn my last true or false to you, Kristine. True or false? Moon Knight was a good MCU show.
They had me until this episode. They really did. They had, like, I didn't have the same feelings you did about episode 5, Mark. Yes, I did not enjoy the bad mother trope, but it wasn't so bad for me that it ruined the entire episode. Like, I actually thought that episode was really beautiful and powerful. I wish they had done more to acknowledge Jake in order to add to the beauty that is self-discovery and self-confrontation and all of that. The challenge that is, right? Like, they showed how hard it can be to face your true self. Like, I fucking loved that last episode. And I was really, really into this show until this episode, where to me it just all fell apart. And there are all these questions, and now I'm like, the things that people said this episode just didn't make any sense to me, that we had to have a segment of the show called Make It Make Sense. We've never done that before. So for me, I can't say it was a good show, because as we've said before, to be a good show, you gotta stick the landing. As much as I love Game of Thrones, they fucked it up. It wasn't the best show on television. And like, I cannot say that because of the second half of season 7 and the vast majority of season 8. You gotta stick the landing. And this was not a stuck landing for me at all.
And I completely agree. I mean, the show had its ups and downs. For instance, I think the first half of episode 4 dragged. And I think there were some, execution flaws throughout the show. Not in a way that made it bad, but just in a way that, if somebody had gone back and maybe like just done some editing and done some rethinking. And as I think about this episode, I just keep coming back to the fact that the show would have been cleaner and I think better written if Harrow hadn't succeeded in resurrecting Amit. And it became about Harrow, Mark/Steven, and Khonshu. Because we already had a natural sort of triangle of conflict there. And all Amit really did was just add in my opinion, special effects. Yeah. It was just like an excuse to have Harrow have a different color-coded power. It was an excuse to have the kaiju battle. It was an excuse to do a lot of things. But at the end of the day, Amit was kind of the epitome of a bad MCU villain, one who just sort of appears for the sake of having a bad guy to fight, for the sake of having a special effects extravaganza, and then kind of disappears. Like, I'm never going to think about Amit again when I'm watching an MCU show. Amit's gone. Now Harrow's gone. Harrow was much more compelling than Amit, and I would have rather seen that. And, I don't necessarily, I can't say exactly how I would have rewritten the episode.
Sure.
But I just think some focus on that conflict between the three characters that I named, Layla as sort of this outside arbiter who can give some context and grounding to that. And then Jake Lockley, maybe the scenario is that Mark and Steven are not going to judge Harrow in the way that Harrow would judge, or in the way that Khonshu would judge. And then Jake Lockley comes in and kills the shit out of Harrow anyway. Like, you get kind of the same ending. You get Jake Lockley involved, but you don't have this whole set of MacGuffins that we chased after this entire episode. It just really felt as if a series of dominoes were set up for the first 5 episodes, and it felt almost mechanical. Like, we got to resolve, and now here's your setup for season 2. It just felt paint by numbers in the worst way possible.
Well, my only real superpower is conversations with you guys. Jesse, if people want to talk to you about which Power Ranger would win the ultimatum, where can they find and follow you?
They can find and follow me on the last days of free Twitter before Elon Musk takes over.
Gosh, yeah.
Jesse L. Taylor, JESSELTAYLOR.
Kristine, if people want to talk to you about, I don't know, abortion funds and Texas and what else? Something else important. Where should they find and follow you?
And LGBTQ liberation. Definitely.
Yeah.
Give me a holler over at Kippins K on either Instagram or The Dirty Bird.
Well, Moon Knight is a wrap, and that means this particular season of the Marvelous TV Club is a wrap. So, legendary listeners, that is our show and our series for today. If you are enjoying the show, leave us a 5-star Apple review so we can rise in the search rankings. It would mean the world to us. And if you want to talk to me some more, you can join me at the Marvelous TV Club Facebook page, Twitter page, Instagram page, all at Marvelous TV Club. And of course, I'm on Twitter at Mark with a C, F as in Frank, ALETTI. All right, team, let's go slaughter a bunch of innocent hospital workers so we can ice a feeble man in our new limo.